Hey guys, Mike from Iron Beak Forge, and today we're going to be making a W's pattern. On this particular W's, we're going to be using Neil Kamimura's gradient technique. If you want to know more about that technique, head on over to Neil's page or to Dennis Tyrell's page and check out the content that they have to explain it. Basically though, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting with some Damascus stock as our base stock for W's. We've added in some other pieces of 1080 and 15N20 and also some nickel, which we're going to have on our edge. I have not run into any issues with, but if you don't want it, don't put it in there. Anyway, we're going to start with our basic stock here, as you would for any pattern. We're going to take that, crush it down, and restack it 3 times. From there, we're going to come down here and we're going to turn that into the basis for W's. Once we have our W stack, we're going to cut that into 5. We're going to restack it here, take a slice from it, and forge that into a Kiridashi. Should be pretty rad. All right guys, so in our starting stack here, what we have is these thicker pieces are gradient stock. Again, see Neil's video or content for that. What we have in between is just the rest of our pattern. We have on the ends 1080 so that it'll etch dark, and then alternating we have 15N20, 1080, 15N20. In these spots where there's 1080, there's also nickel shim stock. And yes, that is going to end up on our edge. No, I haven't had a problem with it so far, but again, if you don't want to do that, don't do it. So what we're hoping to accomplish here is alternating thickness of lines in our W's pattern. And we should do that by this gradient stock being different thicknesses. Some of it's just over 1/8, some of it's a full 1/4 inch, and each of those is 12 layers. So those layers are all going to be different thicknesses because they've been condensed at different rates. And then we, of course, have our 1/8 1080 and our 1/16 15N20. And that's our starting stack. Before we go any further, I did want to take a minute and mention 3M as our sponsor and also Production Strategies Incorporated for providing the film crew and making this all possible. Thank you all so much for the sponsorship. And if anyone else is interested, hit me up. You guys might be wondering why we're doing such a big starting stack. This is roughly 15 pounds of steel. We're making a small Kiridashi. We don't need this much steel. However, to get the pattern that we need a big stack, number one. Number two, I make and sell Damascus to other makers. If you're interested in such things, Michael Hasselt, the spelling will be on the screen. Easiest place to find it is on Facebook. But I don't like to do all of this work just for one blade. So I do all this work and hopefully we get at least enough steel for 4 or 5 blades. But if you need to shorten your stack, you can. You can just restack more times to get to the same layer count ultimately, which is a little bit more work in my opinion, but it can definitely be done. All right guys, so here we're just setting our initial welds. Very quick, very light, really just making sure each section of steel is set, and then right back into the forge for another 5 to 10 minutes to let that steel really get in contact at welding temp for a good time before we continue to press our welds. Here we're on our 3rd rounds of setting the welds. After this, we're going to move a little bit faster forging because the welds will have had enough time in the forge under the heat to really set up, and I'm not as worried about shearing them. The 4th heat is where I really kind of step on the gas, so to speak, to start forging this out down to our final size and shape where we're going to cut and restack it. Here I can see the weld is starting to break on my handle. Really, we could continue on with tongs, but I don't like to do that. I like to have a nice long handle, so I'm just re-welding the handle here. It's a common thing that happens as you forge down. Sometimes the welds rip off of the handle, and you just re-weld it. It's not a big stumbling block. All right, so all we're doing here is we're just dimensionalizing our steel. We're gonna end up at 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches by however long it ends up. We're gonna cut the ends off. We're gonna divide that by 3, and we're gonna clean those up and restack them into thirds. We have a total of a 7-inch throat on this press, so generally I like to be at or under 2 inches. It gives me a little bit of room to slide the steel in and out without having to worry about being too close on fitting it. All right, so our steel is all cooled off now. We're gonna cut the end off of it. I'm gonna etch that so I can see how many times I need to cut and restack this in terms of pattern density. So you can see here what we're looking for is a gradient of colors. And when we get done, we're gonna squish this down into the basis for W's so that they're not straight lines. They'll go like, it'll first start as a U, and we'll stack that into W's. So the next step here is we're gonna grind this clean on 2 sides, 2 full sides. We're gonna cut it up. We're gonna grind it today with a combination of 3 abrasives. We have a grinding stone and these Cubitron 3 discs that we're gonna be using. And they'll clean it up in no time flat. Still my least favorite part of the process, but must be done. Whenever you take the ends off, I like to be really conservative when I cut my ends because you can always cut more. Now that I've cleaned it, I can see I need to take about another inch off this side and a half inch off this side. So I'll cut that again and then I'll measure this out. All right, he's ready to weld. So we're here in the step. We just finished this step. Now we've cut it into 3. We're gonna squish it this way to forge those together. And then from there, we're gonna move down to this step where we squish the corners in, and we're gonna tighten that up to make the basis for W's. I think I'm pretty close. We're gonna try it, see how it goes. A little more. They're a lot better than they were. All right, so right here you're gonna see my weld brake that's holding these pieces together so that I can forge weld them. Not the biggest deal. The problem is on the next heat when it's not actually stuck and I go to forge it again and it delams. And this is really a pivotal point because the temptation is to try and ram it back under the press and see if I can get it to stick. And the truth of it is now that it's flat, the best thing that I can do is put it back in the fire and leave it alone for 5 to 10 minutes at least and let the steel be against itself and try and weld in the heat away from the oxygen. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna give it 10 to 15 minutes in the fire, and then on the next heat, you're gonna see that it's mostly closed back up, and we just kind of close it up as we go. Because we're running a reducing environment in our forge, we don't have a ton of oxygen in there building up scale, and that's really gonna help us in this case because it's gonna allow us to save this piece without any extra work. Now I can kind of proceed to weld as normal without worry about it splitting apart. Of course, I am still worried about it splitting apart because until I turn it sideways and really check those welds as I'm making W's, I won't know for sure if it's stuck. I see a trapezoid forming as I'm forging out here. It's not perfectly square, and the easiest way to fix that is to just stop and shim the part that's not forging correctly. In this case, I'm going to shim up the right side of the billet. That's going to bring that trapezoid thing up straight so that I can then press it back into square. Once the shim pops out, we're just ready to keep on forging, and it's pretty much square. The next thing we're going to do anyway is pop the corners in. It's not a huge deal. You can definitely work around it, but I'd always rather have it be square if that's an option. Here we're going to knock the corners in, and you don't have to do this to make W's, but I find that it helps. Really what that's doing is it's forcing the edges into a C, and then you're setting that C hard as you come down and really squish it into half of a W or a C. And then as we restack it, it'll further cement and lock those curves in as we restack up into our 4 or 5 stack, moving into the next step. I see a shadow I don't love. We're good. One more heat, we should be good. Maybe two. Not quite. We're here on day 2 of our W's build. Quick announcement, yesterday between filming days we just picked up Brodbeck Ironworks, Ryan Brodbeck, as a channel sponsor. So thank you to Brodbeck Ironworks. I've been using a Brodbeck grinder since the day I started making knives. I have zero complaints with it. It's a fantastic piece of equipment. Soon we're going to be reviewing the surface grinding attachment, and we're going to be comparing it to the Ameribraid. And I'm going to give you the pros and cons of each. The rotary platens are expensive. Before you make your purchase, we're going to compare a couple of them. Right now though, what we're going to do is we're going to enter this semi-final step of our build. And we've cut our billet into 5 from here, and we're going to restack it, weld it, forge weld it, and then once that's welded up, we're going to take a slice and we're going to make our Kiridashi. So we're getting close. For those of you that are new to forging, your first few heats are really just all about setting and aging the weld, right? Your first heat is setting the weld very gingerly, light squish or tap on the hammer, and then the next heat, you're just gonna slowly increase that pressure until you've done 3 or 4 heats and those welds are really, really secure. So one of the things that when I first started I really struggled with was knowing the color that the steel needed to be when it was up to welding temp. Now I just set my forge and then I wait for the steel to be the same color. But it's really hard to capture on camera the correct color because the cameras adjust. However, since we're using manual focus cameras, I had the crew make a point to capture the actual, as close to the actual color as possible of steel at forge welding temp without adjusting the camera down for brightness. I've set my digital press controller to 2 inches and we're going to make a 2x2 inch square. This is roughly because I need a maximum of 2 inches height on my Kiridashi at the widest part, and that'll allow me to not have to forge extra width into it and mess with the pattern. I can just condense the parts that need condensing to add length and then squish out to add a little bit more length and get to the final dimension on the Kiridashi, and then we're going to just grind in our single chisel bevel. We've got our piece cut off of our main billet, and what we're going to do, we'll probably have more than we need. We've got almost 3/4 of an inch, just over half, probably about 5/8. We're going to grind all the scale off and make sure that we don't have any ragged edges on here, because when we go to forge it out, I don't want any of my welds opening up, and it's easier to just grind it smooth than to have a tag that then rips open. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to plug in our 3M Cubitron 3 on our trusty Broadback Ironworks that's been serving us well for 3 years. And we're going to rip this scale off. So we're done grinding. It does not have to end up perfectly square. We're about to forge it into a non-square shape anyway. So all we wanted to do is make sure that we got all of our little seams at the edges of our welds that are almost always crusty, uncrusty. We've done that. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to just etch it so that I know when I'm forging, I forge in the correct direction. Because I don't want to forge in the other direction. I'll take the W's right out of the piece. And what I want to do is continue to crush it and accentuate the W's. I might have split a weld already. Probably the wrong tongs for this task. Yeah. the corners just a little bit rounded. Yay, that's our tongue. I might hit it with the power hammer one more. All right, guys, we're roughly at this step right here. As you can see, it perfectly matches the paper there. So that's our Kiridashi tip. And we'll clean it up on the grinder. Good to go. All right, we'll let that cool off down to black. Now we're done forging it. Here we're going to just go ahead and normalize our blade, get all those crystals up to roughly the same size. We're just doing this by color, and then we're going to begin our thermal cycle process to make sure that we can shrink our crystals down before we heat treat. After that, we're going to take all the scale off. We're going to make it one thickness on the surface grinder, and then we'll throw it in the quench with some anti-scale compound on it to make sure we don't decarb in the kiln, now that we've already removed all the forged scale. We're going to end up with a test edge because I just can't resist. Oh, those stretch really far. Oh, here's a better look. You can see the gradient towards the tip really well. Skates file, it's hard enough. We're going to go into the temper. We've cooled that off the rest of the way. Someone's going to say something about that, but I'll have them know it's perfectly straight and it did not crack. We were well under 500 degrees when I hit the water. So, be mad about it.